The rain hammered down on Ridgewood's empty streets at 2 o'clock a.m. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, but attacks, pounding against rooftops, flooding gutters, and reducing visibility to arm's length. It was in this deluge that Mason Hayes found her. A woman lay crumpled against his front door, her designer coat soaked through, a thin trail of blood at the corner of her mouth. Each breath seemed to cost her everything. Her expensive clothes told a story of wealth and violence, torn fabric revealing injuries that spoke of someone's deliberate cruelty. When desperate eyes met his through the porch light's yellow glow, her voice was barely audible. "No more pain. My ribs are already broken." Mason stood frozen in the storm, rainwater cascading off his baseball cap. His calloused hand instinctively moved toward the phone in his pocket, then stopped. The decision weighed on him like physical mass. Call 911 and let the system handle whatever nightmare had brought this woman to his doorstep, or bring a stranger into his daughter's carefully protected world. Behind him, 8-year-old Emma slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that her father was about to make a choice that would change everything. "Please," the woman whispered, rain mixing with tears on her bruised face. "They're still hunting me." As if summoned by her words, headlights swept slowly down the street. A black SUV with tinted windows crawled past Mason's modest bungalow, its pace deliberate and predatory. The woman shrank back against the door, terror written across her face. Mason made his decision with the speed and certainty that had once kept him alive in combat. He lifted the woman as gently as possible, her body feather light despite her height, and carried her inside, locking the door behind them. Mason Hayes had grown accustomed to sleepless nights. 3 years of single parenthood would do that to a man. He'd just finished his security shift at Ridgewood General Hospital, driving his pickup through the rain toward home. At 40, Mason had learned to find peace in routine. Work at Wilson's garage by day, pick up Emma from school, then his night security job. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was what he'd built after Rebecca died. His 1950s bungalow wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, worn hardwood floors, and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. But it was paid for, thanks to his military service, and it was theirs. Their fortress against a world that had already taken too much from them. "Let me help you," Mason said, his voice low and steady as he eased the woman onto his couch. Up close, her injuries were worse than he'd thought. Bruising around her throat, defensive wounds on her forearms, and the way she cradled her left side told him she hadn't been exaggerating about her ribs. 20 minutes later, Mason had done what he could with his first aid training, which was considerable. 2 tours in Afghanistan as a special forces medic had taught him more than most emergency room doctors would see in a lifetime. He'd cleaned her cuts, applied ice to the worst bruising, and wrapped her ribs with the steady hands of someone who'd performed the same task under artillery fire. "I need to know what I'm dealing with here," Mason said, sitting on the coffee table across from the couch. "Those weren't random headlights passing by, were they?" The woman's eyes, a striking green-gray that reminded him of the ocean before a storm, studied him carefully. In the soft living room light, Mason could see she was in her early 40s, with the kind of elegance that came from more than just money. Despite her injuries, there was something regal in her posture, a dignity that pain couldn't erase. "My name is Claire," she said finally. "Claire Blackwood." She paused as if waiting for recognition that didn't come. "I was mugged. They took my phone, my wallet. I saw your porch light and just..." She winced as she shifted position. "I'm sorry to involve you in this." The lie hung between them, as obvious as a billboard. Mason had treated enough combat injuries to know the difference between a mugging and a deliberate beating. This was the latter. And those men in the SUV weren't random criminals returning to the scene. "Claire," Mason said, choosing his words carefully, "I've got an 8-year-old daughter sleeping upstairs. If there's danger following you, I need to know what kind." A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Claire's face. "I shouldn't have come here. I can leave as soon as the rain lets up." She tried to stand but gasped as pain shot through her side. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Mason said firmly, easing her back down. "But tomorrow I need the truth." Claire nodded reluctantly, her eyes already heavy with exhaustion and the mild painkillers he'd given her. "Tomorrow," she agreed. After making sure Claire was as comfortable as possible on the couch, Mason climbed the creaking stairs to check on Emma. His daughter slept the way only children can, sprawled across her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals, her wild brown curls a halo around her head. So much like her mother, it sometimes hurt to look at her. He brushed a curl from her forehead, his chest tight with the fierce, protective love that had defined his existence since the moment the nurse had placed her in his arms 8 years ago. Everything he did, every early morning, every late night, every sacrifice, was for her. "I'm not sure what I just did, Bex," he whispered to the memory of his wife, "but I think you'd have done the same." The next morning, Mason woke at dawn from his makeshift bed in the recliner, where he'd positioned himself between the front door and the couch. Old habits. Never sleep with your back to the door. Always keep the principle between you and potential threats. The smell of coffee pulled him fully awake. He found Claire in his kitchen, moving with careful precision as she poured water into his ancient coffee maker. "I hope you don't mind," she said, noticing him watching. "I wanted to make myself useful." In the morning light, Claire looked simultaneously better and worse. The swelling in her face had gone down, but the bruises had darkened to deep purple. She'd found one of his flannel shirts to wear over her torn blouse, the sleeves rolled up several times to accommodate her slimmer arms. "How are the ribs?" Mason asked, taking over the coffee preparation. "Breathing is interesting," Claire admitted with a wry smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful, despite the bruising. "But I've had worse." Mason raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't press. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came from the doorway. His daughter stood there in her favorite Star Wars pajamas, brown eyes wide as she took in the stranger in their kitchen. "Who's that?" Before Mason could answer, Claire knelt down to Emma's eye level, moving slowly to accommodate her injuries. "I'm Claire," she said, her voice gentler than it had been with Mason. "I'm an old friend of your dad's. I had some car trouble last night, and he was kind enough to let me stay." Mason was impressed by the smooth lie, tailored perfectly for an 8-year-old's understanding. He'd have to remember to thank her for not mentioning the injuries, which Emma was now studying with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Did you fall down?" Emma asked, pointing to Claire's bruised cheek. "Something like that," Claire said with a small smile. "I'm a bit clumsy sometimes." Emma nodded sagely. "Daddy says I'm like a baby giraffe, all legs and no coordination." Mason chuckled, ruffling his daughter's unruly hair. "Breakfast first, interrogation later. Kiddo, go wash up." After Emma left, Claire straightened carefully, one hand braced against the counter for support. "You have a wonderful daughter," she said quietly. "She's my whole world," Mason replied simply. Over breakfast, pancakes that Mason insisted on making despite Claire's offers to help, Emma chattered away about school, her upcoming science project, and the treehouse Mason was building in the backyard. Claire listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed she was either very good with children or had experience with them. "Miss Claire talks funny," Emma announced between bites of syrup-drenched pancake. "Like she's always thinking about something else." "Emma," Mason admonished gently, but Claire laughed. "You're very perceptive," she told Emma. "My father always said the same thing. He said I had a mind that never stopped calculating." "What's calculating?" Emma sounded out the word carefully. "It means thinking about numbers and possibilities," Claire explained. "Like chess, but with everything." Emma's face lit up. "Daddy taught me chess. I'm getting really good. Want to play later?" "I'd like that," Claire said, and Mason was surprised to hear genuine warmth in her voice. After breakfast, Mason drove Emma to school, leaving Claire to rest. The school run was their special time, 10 minutes of uninterrupted conversation where Emma would share things she might not say at home. Today, she was full of questions about their visitor. "Is Miss Claire your girlfriend?" Emma asked with the bluntness of childhood. Mason nearly choked on his coffee. "No, honey, like she said, she's just an old friend who needed help." "She doesn't look like your other friends," Emma observed. "She looks like the ladies on Mommy's fashion magazines." Mason couldn't argue with that. Claire Blackwood, even injured and wearing borrowed clothes, had the unmistakable aura of wealth and sophistication that set her apart from his usual circle of mechanics, security guards, and fellow veterans. "People come in all types, Em," he said instead. "Remember what we always say? Judge by actions, not appearances." Emma recited dutifully. Then after a pause, I like her. She's sad inside, like you sometimes are, but she's nice. Out of the mouths of babes. Mason marveled at his daughter's emotional intelligence, something she definitely inherited from Rebecca, not him. I think she's nice too, he agreed. Now remember what we talked about for emergencies? Emma rolled her eyes, having heard this countless times. If something feels wrong, call you immediately. If you don't answer, call Uncle Dave. If I can't reach either of you, go to Mrs. Harrison next door. And the special hiding place if someone comes to the house who isn't you, Emma finished. Daddy, we practice this every week. I know. Mason nodded, satisfied. The special hiding place was a reinforced closet in his bedroom with a hidden door, something he'd installed after Rebecca died, when his PTSD and paranoia had been at their worst. He'd gradually learned to manage both, but the hiding place remained, along with other security measures that his friends thought excessive, but that helped him sleep at night. When he returned home, he found Claire examining the bookshelves in his living room. She'd showered and changed into more of Rebecca's old clothes, simple jeans and a navy sweater that hung differently on her taller frame, but somehow looked right. Your wife had excellent taste, Claire said, gesturing to the clothes. I hope you don't mind. My things were unwearable. Rebecca would have been happy they're being used, Mason said, surprised to find he meant it. For the first time, handling Rebecca's belongings didn't feel like reopening a wound. She was always practical that way. Claire nodded, then winced slightly, one hand going to her ribs. Mason noticed she'd done her best to cover the bruising on her face with makeup she must have found in the bathroom, but the dark circles under her eyes remained. You should be resting, he said, professional concern overtaking his curiosity. I've rested enough, Claire replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. And you deserve answers. I owe you that much. Mason gestured for her to sit, taking the armchair across from the couch. Let's start with the truth about last night, he said quietly. Claire took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond his shoulder. I wasn't mugged, she admitted. I was attacked, specifically targeted. By whom? My brother Alexander. Claire's mouth twisted around the name, or rather men working for him. Mason kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. Family violence was always complicated, tangled with history and emotion in ways that made it particularly volatile. Why would your brother want to hurt you? He asked. Claire laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. For 5 billion reasons, she said. At Mason's raised eyebrow, she elaborated. I'm the CEO of Blackwood Industries. Until recently, Alexander was COO. 3 months ago, I removed him from that position after discovering he was making unauthorized deals with unsavory parties. Mason's mind worked to place the name, Blackwood Industries, one of those massive conglomerates that owned everything from tech companies to resource extraction operations in developing countries. The kind of corporation whose decisions affected millions, but remained invisible to most ordinary people. I'm guessing he didn't take it well, Mason said dryly. That would be an understatement. Claire shifted, adjusting her position to ease the pressure on her ribs. Alexander has always believed that he should be running the company, that as the male heir, it was his birthright. When our father died 5 years ago and left control to me instead, Alexander nearly had a breakdown. But he stayed, Mason observed. He stayed, Claire confirmed, and for a while I thought we could make it work. I handled the big picture, the innovation, the public face. He handled operations, the day-to-day. But then I discovered what he was really doing. Her face darkened with anger and something else, hurt, perhaps, the betrayal of family cutting deeper than any business disagreement could. What was he doing? Mason prompted gently. Claire hesitated, measuring her words. Our father built Blackwood Industries through flexible ethics, deals with dictatorships, environmental shortcuts, the occasional bribe to the right official. When I took over, I spent 5 years cleaning house, cutting ties with partners whose practices I couldn't stomach, investing in sustainability, establishing oversight. And Alexander was undermining that, Mason guessed. Claire nodded. He was maintaining the old relationships through shell companies, making deals I'd explicitly forbidden, selling technology to military contractors who were turning it into weapons. When I confronted him with evidence, he didn't even deny it. He said it was business as usual, and that my moral crusade was destroying the company. Mason was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd gotten involved in. This wasn't a simple family dispute. This was corporate warfare with billions at stake. That explains the professional disagreement, he said carefully, but not why he'd try to have you killed. That's a big escalation from boardroom politics. Claire's eyes met his directly for the first time. Because I was about to expose everything. I have documentation of all his illegal dealings, including evidence that could lead to federal indictments. The board meeting is in 3 days. Once I present my findings, Alexander is finished, not just at Blackwood, but possibly facing prison time. Mason whistled low. That would do it. He's been trying to stop me for months, Claire continued. First, subtle intimidation, then accidents, brake failure on my car, a gas leak in my apartment. But I have security, protocols. Until yesterday, he hadn't been able to get close. What changed? I trusted the wrong person. Claire's voice was bitter. Catherine Reynolds, my CFO. I thought she was loyal to me, to the company. Turns out she's been Alexander's ally from the beginning. She arranged a meeting at a restaurant, then canceled at the last minute. When I left, his men were waiting. Mason frowned. But you got away. Barely. There was a crowd leaving a theater nearby. I managed to lose them, took a rideshare to a hotel, but they found me there too. I've been running all night, ditched my phone because I realized they must be tracking it. I ended up in this neighborhood by chance, saw your porch light. She trailed off, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Why not go to the police? Mason asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. With what evidence? Claire spread her hands. I have documentation of corporate malfeasance, yes, but nothing that directly ties Alexander to the attacks. He's careful, always using intermediaries, maintaining plausible deniability. And with his connections, how long before he found out exactly which police station I was at? Mason nodded slowly. It made a twisted kind of sense. The ultra-wealthy played by different rules, operated in a world where official channels were just another system to be manipulated. I shouldn't have involved you, Claire said quietly. I can leave now. Find a hotel using cash. Lie low until the board meeting. And if they find you before then? Mason asked. Claire's silence was answer enough. Mason stood, pacing the small living room as he thought. Everything in his training, both military and civilian, told him to walk away from this. Call in a favor with his police contacts, get her somewhere safe, and extract himself and Emma from whatever corporate bloodbath was unfolding. But something held him back. Maybe it was the soldier in him, unable to abandon someone in danger. Maybe it was the way Claire had spoken to Emma, with genuine kindness rather than the condescension many adults showed children. Or maybe it was simply that, for the first time in 3 years, he felt fully alert, fully present, the fog of grief and routine momentarily lifted by crisis. 3 days until this board meeting? He asked finally. Claire nodded cautiously. Then you stay here for 3 days, Mason decided. My security system is better than any hotel's, I promise you that. We'll figure out how to get you to that meeting safely when the time comes. Relief flooded Claire's face, followed quickly by doubt. Your daughter. Emma will be fine, Mason said firmly. She's tougher than she looks. And this house is as secure as I could make it without turning it into an actual bunker. I can't ask you to take this risk, Claire protested. You didn't ask, Mason pointed out. I offered. Besides, turning away someone who needs help isn't the example I want to set for my daughter. A soft knock at the front door interrupted them. Mason tensed immediately, motioning for Claire to stay seated as he moved to the window, carefully peering through a gap in the curtains. It's my neighbor, Mrs. Harrison, he said, relaxing slightly, probably bringing over muffins or something. She does that sometimes. Claire nodded, but Mason noticed how she shifted to keep the couch between herself and the door. A protective instinct he recognized from his own combat days. Mason opened the door to find Eleanor Harrison, a silver-haired woman in her 60s who had lived next door for decades. She was indeed holding a basket of what smelled like freshly baked banana bread. Good morning, Mason, she said warmly. I thought you and Emma might enjoy these. I made too many as usual. That's very kind, Mrs. Harrison, Mason said, accepting the basket. Emma will be thrilled. Mrs. Harrison peered past him into the living room, where Claire was visible on the couch. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company," she said, curiosity evident in her tone. "This is Claire," Mason said smoothly, "an old friend visiting for a few days." "How lovely," Mrs. Harrison smiled. "It's about time you had someone over besides Dave and those other military friends of yours. Will she be joining you and Emma for the block party this weekend?" Mason had completely forgotten about the neighborhood block party, an annual tradition that Emma looked forward to all year. "We'll see," he hedged. "Claire's not feeling well right now." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," Mrs. Harrison said, genuine concern in her voice. "Well, I hope you feel better soon, dear," she called to Claire, who managed a polite smile and wave in return. After Mrs. Harrison left, Mason secured the door and returned to the living room, where Claire was looking at him with an unreadable expression. "You've created a whole life here," she said quietly. "Neighbors who bring baked goods, block parties, a community. I'm disrupting all of that." "It's 3 days," Mason reminded her. "And yes, I've built something stable for Emma. That's what parents do." Claire nodded, a flicker of something like envy crossing her face. "I wouldn't know," she said softly. "My parents saw children as assets to be optimized, not people to be nurtured. My childhood was a series of strategic investments, the right schools, the right activities, the right connections, everything in service to the family legacy." Mason recognized the pain beneath her matter-of-fact tone. He'd met enough soldiers from similar backgrounds, driven to prove themselves, to escape expectations, or sometimes just to find somewhere they belonged. "That explains a lot about why you're trying to change the company," he observed. Claire looked surprised, as if she hadn't made the connection herself. "I suppose it does," she admitted. "I never wanted to be just another link in the Blackwood chain." Their conversation was interrupted by Mason's phone ringing. He checked the screen, then answered. "Hey, Dave, what's up?" Dave Chen had been Mason's second-in-command in Afghanistan and now worked private security for corporate clients in the city. They stayed in close contact, with Dave serving as both Emma's honorary uncle and Mason's occasional connection to the world of high-end security work. "You watching the news?" Dave asked without preamble. "No, why?" "There's something you should see. Channel 7. Mason found the remote and switched on the small TV in the corner of the living room. The midday news was running a breaking story, and Mason felt Claire stiffen beside him as her own face appeared on the screen. "Concerning disappearance of Claire Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, who has not been seen since yesterday evening," the anchor was saying. A company spokesperson expressed concern after Ms. Blackwood missed several important meetings this morning and could not be reached by phone. The scene cut to a press conference where a man in an impeccable suit stood at a podium, his expression a perfect mask of concern. Even without the caption identifying him as Alexander Blackwood, Mason would have recognized the family resemblance. The same sharp cheekbones, the same commanding presence. "My sister has been under tremendous pressure lately," Alexander was saying, his voice smooth as polished marble. "We're deeply concerned for her well-being and are cooperating fully with authorities. If anyone has information about Claire's whereabouts, please contact the police immediately." Claire's laugh was so bitter it seemed to scrape her throat. "Well played, Alexander," she murmured, painting me as unstable, laying groundwork for whatever comes next. The report continued, mentioning Claire's erratic behavior in recent months, according to company sources, and her increasing isolation from colleagues and friends. "He's setting the stage," Claire explained, her analytical mind clearly at work despite her exhaustion. "If I show up with accusations against him, he's already planted the seed that I'm unstable. If I don't show up at all," she trailed off, the implication clear. Mason switched off the TV, his decision crystallizing. "This changes things," he said quietly. "If the police are looking for you, staying here just got more complicated." "I should go," Claire said immediately, starting to rise. Mason shook his head. "That's not what I meant. We need a better plan than just hiding out for 3 days. We need to get your evidence somewhere safe, figure out who you can trust at the company, and make sure you make it to that board meeting." Claire studied him, confusion evident in her expression. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Mason was silent for a moment, considering her question. It was fair, more than fair. He had no obligation to this woman, and every reason to protect his daughter by staying out of what was clearly a dangerous situation. But something about Claire's determination, her willingness to risk everything to do what she believed was right, resonated with him. It reminded him of values he'd once fought for, before grief and responsibility had narrowed his world to just getting through each day. Let's just say I've got a thing about bullies, he said finally, especially ones who think their money puts them above consequences. Before Claire could respond, Mason's phone rang again. This time it was Emma's school. Mr. Hayes? The principal's voice was tense. I'm calling because there's been an incident. Emma is fine, she added quickly, but we've had an unauthorized person attempt to pick her up from school, a man claiming to be her uncle. Mason's blood ran cold. I'm on my way, he said, already reaching for his keys. Don't let her out of your sight. As he hung up, he turned to Claire, whose face had gone pale with understanding. They found you, she whispered. How could they possibly? Questions later, Mason cut her off, his voice shifting to the clipped command tone of his military days. Right now, we need to move. They know you're connected to me, which means this house isn't safe anymore. He quickly retrieved a go-bag from the hall closet, a habit from his service days that had seemed paranoid until this moment, and tossed it to Claire. Basic supplies, first aid, some cash. There's a loaded Glock in the side pocket if you know how to use it. Claire unzipped the pocket and checked the weapon with the practiced movements of someone familiar with firearms, which answered that question. I took self-defense seriously after the first attempt on my life, she explained, catching his surprised look. Mason nodded, grabbing his own weapon from the drive to Emma's school was the longest 15 minutes of Mason's life. His knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as he navigated Ridgewood's rain-slicked streets, Claire tense and silent beside him. They'd taken back roads, constantly checking for tails, a precaution that felt surreal in this quiet suburban setting. Emma was waiting in the principal's office, her small face lighting up with relief when she spotted Mason. She launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him back. Daddy, there was a man who said he was Uncle Dave, but he wasn't Uncle Dave at all, and Mrs. Ramirez knew because I remembered the secret password thing. And, slow down, pumpkin, Mason said, kneeling to her level. His hands automatically checked her for injuries, a parental instinct amplified by his combat training. You're safe now. You did exactly right. Emma nodded solemnly before noticing Claire hovering in the doorway. Miss Claire, you came too. Dr. Lewis, the principal, approached with a tablet in hand. Mr. Hayes, we've already contacted the police. I have security footage of the individual. She glanced pointedly at Claire, clearly uncertain about sharing information with a stranger. She's with me, Mason assured her. Can we see the footage? The video showed a well-dressed man in his 30s with the clean-cut appearance of corporate security. Mason didn't recognize him, but Claire's sharp intake of breath suggested she did. That's Dominic Reeves, she whispered. He works directly for Alexander, former military intelligence. Mason's jaw tightened. We need to move. Now. They left through a side entrance, Mason carrying Emma despite her protests that she was too big to be carried. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds threatened another downpour as they hurried to the truck. Where are we going, Daddy? Emma asked as Mason secured her seatbelt. Remember our special cabin? With the lake and the frogs you like? Emma's face brightened. Really? But it's not summer yet. We're taking an extra special trip, Mason explained, starting the engine. Miss Claire needs somewhere quiet to rest and get better. Emma seemed to accept this, settling back with the contented adaptability of childhood. Mason caught Claire watching his daughter with an expression that mingled admiration and something like wistfulness. Your daughter is remarkable, Claire said quietly as Mason navigated through town, taking another circuitous route. Most children would be terrified after what just happened. Emma's been through a lot, Mason replied, eyes scanning for surveillance. Kids are resilient when they feel secure, and we've practiced for emergencies, though I never expected to need those drills. They stopped briefly at a convenience store where Mason bought prepaid phones and basic supplies. Claire remained in the truck with Emma, a baseball cap pulled low over her face. When Mason returned, he found them deep in conversation about Emma's stuffed elephant and its elaborate backstory. Ellie goes everywhere with me, Emma was explaining, She's very brave. Daddy says elephants never forget anything, so she remembers Mommy for me. Mason felt his throat tighten as he climbed back into the driver's seat. Claire met his eyes briefly, her expression soft with understanding. The cabin was a 3-hour drive north, tucked away in the mountains where Mason's grandfather had built it decades ago. They took secondary highways and logging roads, changing directions several times to ensure they weren't followed. Mason made one call from the prepaid phone to Dave, informing him of the situation in sparse, coded language developed during their service years. "Watch your six," Dave had responded. "I'll run interference and check on the house. Standard protocol?" "Affirmative, 3-day window." Mason could feel Claire watching him curiously. "Standard protocol?" she asked after he ended the call. "Dave will make it look like we're still at the house," Mason explained. "Lights on timers, occasional movement past windows, buys us time." Claire nodded, impressed. "Your military background has made you thorough. Special Forces doesn't train you to do things halfway," Mason replied with a hint of grimness. "And when Emma was born, my protective instincts went into overdrive." The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, interrupted only by Emma's occasional observations about wildlife or questions about the cabin. By the time they turned onto the final gravel road, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The cabin appeared exactly as Mason had described it, a sturdy A-frame nestled among towering pines, with a small dock extending into a pristine mountain lake. Solar panels gleamed on the southern-facing roof, and a woodpile stood neatly stacked against the side. "It's beautiful," Claire breathed as they pulled up. "So peaceful." Mason allowed himself a small smile. "My grandfather built it after returning from Korea. Said he needed somewhere that felt completely removed from war. He didn't add that he'd felt the same way after Afghanistan, that this place had been his sanctuary during the worst of his PTSD. Emma was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Can I show Miss Claire the dock, please?" "Let's get settled first," Mason replied, surveying the surroundings with a practiced eye. Nothing seemed disturbed, but he would do a thorough check before fully relaxing. "Why don't you help Miss Claire inside while I bring in our things?" The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, an open living area with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms downstairs, and a loft accessible by ladder. Mason had maintained it meticulously, honoring his grandfather's craftsmanship. While Emma enthusiastically showed Claire around, Mason secured the perimeter, checking the sensors he'd installed along the property line. The isolation that had once seemed excessive now felt like a blessing. Their nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away, and the single access road made it impossible to approach undetected. By nightfall, they had settled into an unexpected domesticity. Mason prepared a simple meal from the cabin's well-stocked pantry, while Claire helped Emma set the table. The girls' cheerful chatter filled the space, creating an illusion of normality that almost made Mason forget the circumstances that had brought them there. After dinner, with Emma happily drawing at the kitchen table, Mason and Claire stepped onto the porch. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky in dazzling profusion, the kind of view impossible to see from light-polluted Ridgewood. "Thank you," Claire said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the mountain chill. "For all of this, you've put yourself and Emma at risk for a stranger." Mason leaned against the porch railing. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore." Claire smiled slightly, then winced as the movement pulled at her bruised face. The reminder of her injuries sobered them both. "Tell me more about Alexander," Mason said. "And this Catherine Reynolds who betrayed you. I need to understand what we're dealing with." Claire's expression hardened. "Catherine was my father's protege, and I recently discovered his mistress for many years. When he died, I thought she stayed with the company out of loyalty. Now I realize she was waiting for an opportunity." "To take control herself?" "No, Catherine is brilliant with finances, but has no interest in being the public face. She wants to be the power behind the throne. With Alexander as CEO, she'd have that." Mason processed this. "And Alexander, what drives him beyond simple greed?" Claire was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Alexander believes in a kind of corporate manifest destiny, that the Blackwood name entitles him to power, that regulations and ethics are obstacles to be overcome rather than guidelines to be followed." She paused. "Our grandfather started the company selling munitions during World War II. That legacy of weapons and power runs deep for Alexander. And for you? Mason asked carefully. I want to build something different, Claire replied, her voice strengthening. Clean energy, sustainable technologies, ethical partnerships. I've spent 5 years steering the company in that direction against constant resistance from the old guard. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of an owl. Mason found himself studying Claire's profile in the moonlight, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. She was nothing like the spoiled, entitled executive he might have expected. Earlier, Mason said slowly, you mentioned Blackwood Industries had mining interests in Kajari province. That's where I was deployed. Claire turned to face him fully, her expression grave. I've been wondering about that connection since you mentioned Afghanistan. Kajari was before my time as CEO, but I found disturbing records when I took over. Our security contractors there were essentially acting as private military forces, using weapons that should never have been in that region. Mason felt a familiar tension coiling in his chest, the battlefield instincts that never fully disappeared. My team was ambushed there. 3 men died. We recovered weapons with serial numbers that should have been impossible. American military hardware that had supposedly been decommissioned. Black market, Claire said quietly, funneled through shell companies with Blackwood connections. When I discovered the paper trail, I shut it all down, but the damage was already done. Mason's hands tightened on the railing. Those weapons killed my friends. Rodriguez had a newborn he never met. Taylor was 3 weeks from his wedding. The memories came flooding back, sharper than they had been in years. I'm sorry, Claire said, and the simple sincerity in her voice reached him when years of formal military condolences hadn't. It's why I've fought so hard to change the company. Too many people paid the price for Blackwood profits. Mason was about to respond when a small voice interrupted them. Daddy, I'm finished with my drawing. They turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, holding a paper covered in colorful crayon markings. She approached cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. Can I show you? She asked, looking between them. Of course, sweetheart, Mason said, kneeling to her level. Emma proudly displayed her artwork, a colorful rendition of the cabin with 3 figures standing in front. A tall man, a little girl, and a woman with blonde hair. That's us, she explained. You and me and Miss Claire. And look, I drew all the stars too. Mason felt something catch in his throat at his daughter's easy inclusion of Claire in their family picture. It's beautiful, Em, he said sincerely. You're very talented, Claire added, her voice warm with genuine appreciation. You captured the stars perfectly. Emma beamed at the praise. Can we hang it up? Like at home? Absolutely, Mason agreed. But first, it's bedtime for artists. After getting Emma settled in one of the downstairs bedrooms, Mason returned to find Claire examining the cabin's security system, a sophisticated setup that seemed at odds with the rustic surroundings. This is military grade, she observed. Motion sensors, cellular backup, encrypted communications. Mason nodded. Like I said, Special Forces doesn't do things halfway. After Rebecca died, my paranoia got pretty bad. Building security systems gave me something to focus on. It's not paranoia if they're really after you, Claire said with a wry smile. She sobered quickly. I've been thinking about how they found us so quickly. It shouldn't have been possible. Mason had been pondering the same question. They knew to look for me specifically, not just any man who might be helping you, but me, by name, enough to attempt to take Emma. Claire paled. You think there's a connection we're missing between you and Blackwood Industries? Maybe. Mason moved to the kitchen, pouring them both coffee from the pot he'd made earlier. What do you know about Eleanor Harrison? Your neighbor? Nothing. Why? Mason handed her a mug. She's lived next door for as long as I can remember. Retired school teacher, widowed, makes excellent banana bread, completely unremarkable. But she was very interested in you this morning, and she's the emergency contact I've given Emma's school. Understanding dawned in Claire's eyes. You think she could be watching you? For Alexander? It seems impossible, Mason admitted. But so does Alexander finding us so quickly. Claire sat heavily at the kitchen table, wincing slightly as her ribs protested. If that's true, They could have been monitoring you for years, but why? Mason's mind worked through possibilities. Maybe because of what I knew about Kajari, or maybe he trailed off as a new disturbing thought occurred to him. Rebecca was investigating something before she died. She was a journalist, mostly local stories, but occasionally bigger pieces. She never told me what her last project was about. The car accident, Claire said slowly. You mentioned a drunk driver. That's what the police report said. Mason's voice hardened. I was away when it happened. By the time I got back, she was already buried. I was so broken by grief, so focused on Emma, I never questioned it. Claire reached across the table, her hand covering his. Mason, are you saying— I don't know what I'm saying, he interrupted. It just seems like too many coincidences. My team ambushed with Blackwood-connected weapons. Rebecca's unexplained investigation. Now you showing up on my doorstep of all places. They sat in silence, the implications hanging between them. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice resolute. Tomorrow we need to access the evidence on my USB drive. It contains everything I've gathered on Alexander's operations. Maybe there's something there that connects to you or Rebecca. Mason nodded. I have a laptop here, basic, but it should work. Claire looked relieved. Good. And Mason, thank you for believing me, for helping me. Most people would have called the police or walked away. Most people haven't seen what happens when the powerful aren't held accountable, Mason replied simply. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment something shifted between them, a recognition of shared purpose that went beyond their immediate crisis. Then Mason stood, breaking the moment. You should get some rest. Take the other bedroom downstairs. I'll keep watch for a while. Claire nodded, understanding his need for caution. Good night, Mason. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Mason moved to the window, gazing out at the dark forest surrounding the cabin. For the first time in years, he found himself truly alert, fully present in a way he hadn't been since his military days. The familiar weight of responsibility, not just for Emma now, but for Claire too, settled on his shoulders. But instead of feeling burdened, he felt strangely complete. Morning brought a crystalline clarity to the mountain air, sunlight filtering through pine branches to dapple the cabin's wooden porch. Mason had maintained a vigilant watch through the night, catching only brief periods of rest. Now, as dawn broke, he allowed himself to relax marginally, the night having passed without incident. He was on his second cup of coffee when Claire emerged from her room, looking better than she had since he'd found her on his doorstep. The swelling in her face had subsided, though the bruises remained, painting her skin in fading yellows and purples. She'd found one of the flannel shirts he kept at the cabin, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to accommodate her slimmer frame. Good morning, she said, accepting the coffee he offered. Any trouble during the night? Mason shook his head. All quiet. How are the ribs? Better, Claire replied, though the careful way she moved suggested otherwise. I heal quickly. Emma appeared moments later, still in her pajamas, her hair a wild tangle of curls. She brightened immediately upon seeing them both. Can we have pancakes? Daddy makes the best pancakes in the whole world. Mason laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. Pancakes it is. The morning unfolded with a strange domesticity, Mason at the stove flipping pancakes, Emma setting the table with exaggerated care, Claire brewing fresh coffee. If not for the circumstances, it might have been a normal family vacation. After breakfast, while Emma explored the lakeshore under Mason's watchful eye, Claire set up the laptop on the kitchen table. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency as she accessed the USB drive. This contains everything, she explained as Mason joined her. Financial records, emails, shipping manifests, weapons specifications. Enough to prove Alexander has been selling advanced drone technology to sanctioned countries through shell companies. Mason whistled low. No wonder he wants to stop you. Claire nodded grimly. The technology itself is classified. Artificial intelligence systems that can identify and eliminate targets without human oversight. Essentially autonomous killing machines. The revelation sent a chill through Mason. During his service, he'd witnessed the devastating impact of advanced weapons in irresponsible hands. The thought of truly autonomous systems was terrifying. Show me everything, he said, pulling a chair beside her. For the next hour, they pored over documents, tracing money through labyrinthine corporate structures, following weapons shipments across continents. Claire explained each piece with the precision of someone who had spent years building her case. Here, she said finally, opening a folder labeled Personnel. These are the key players in Alexander's network. Mason scrolled through photographs and dossiers of various executives and security personnel. Nothing seemed familiar until, wait. He stopped at an image of a silver-haired woman in her 60s. The file identified her as Eleanor Reynolds. Reynolds, Mason repeated. Like Catherine Reynolds? Claire leaned closer. Her sister. According to this, she's been on Blackwood's payroll for 12 years. She looked up at Mason, her expression grave. As a surveillance asset. Mason felt his blood run cold. Eleanor Harrison, my neighbor. They've been watching you, Claire whispered, for over a decade. Mason stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen as the implications crashed over him. Eleanor moved in shortly after I returned from my first deployment. She was always so friendly, so helpful after Rebecca died. Mason, Claire's voice was gentle but urgent. What was Rebecca investigating before she died? I don't know. She kept her work private, said it helped her think clearly. He stopped pacing. But her notes, her laptop, everything disappeared after the accident. The police said the car caught fire. Claire was already typing, searching through her files. Let me cross-reference accident reports with Blackwood operations around that time. Outside, Emma's delighted laugh floated through the open window as she discovered something at the lake's edge. The sound grounded Mason, reminding him of what was at stake. Here, Claire said suddenly, 3 years ago, Blackwood Industries was preparing to acquire Terragen Systems, a company specializing in rare earth mineral extraction. The deal was nearly derailed by an expose about environmental violations and indigenous displacement in their mining operations. That sounds like something Rebecca would investigate, Mason said, moving to look over Claire's shoulder. The reporter is listed as anonymous, but the publication date was 1 week after. Claire trailed off, her eyes meeting Mason's. 1 week after Rebecca's accident. The story was never published. The truth hit Mason with physical force. He gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles whitening. They killed her, he said, his voice hollow, because of what she knew. Claire placed her hand over his. Mason, I'm so sorry. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm him, not the dull ache he'd grown accustomed to, but fresh, sharp pain. Then it transformed, crystallizing into cold, focused anger. Alexander, he said, the name like gravel in his throat. His operation killed my wife. We don't know that for certain, Claire cautioned him, but it seems likely Blackwood's security was involved, either Alexander directly or my father's people. Mason's jaw tightened. I need to know. Everything. Before Claire could respond, a shrill sound cut through the cabin, one of the perimeter alarms. Mason was moving instantly, grabbing his weapon from its hiding place. Get Emma, he ordered, his voice shifting to military precision. Secure room, now. Claire didn't waste time with questions, hurrying outside to retrieve Emma while Mason checked the security panel. The eastern sensor had been triggered. Someone was approaching through the forest, deliberately avoiding the main road. By the time Claire returned with a confused Emma, Mason had formulated a plan. Someone's coming, he explained briefly. Probably Alexander's people. There's a hidden room in the main bedroom closet. Get inside with Emma and don't come out until I give the all clear. What about you? Claire asked, already guiding Emma toward the bedroom. I'm going to make sure they never reach the cabin, Mason replied, his expression hardening into the focused mask of a soldier preparing for combat. Claire hesitated, then surprised him by returning to his side. I know how to handle myself, she said firmly, and you shouldn't face this alone. Miss Claire? Emma's small voice came from the bedroom doorway. What's happening? Mason knelt before his daughter, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. Remember our hiding game, Em? I need you to be very quiet in the special hiding place. Miss Claire and I need to take care of something outside. Emma's eyes widened with understanding beyond her years. Is it the bad people? Yes, sweetheart, but don't worry, we know what to do. He kissed her forehead. I love you more than anything in the world. Remember that. I love you too, Daddy, Emma whispered, her small arms tightening around his neck. As Claire led Emma into the hidden room, Mason gathered his weapons and equipment. Years of military training took over, his movements precise and economical. By the time Claire returned, he had formulated a defensive strategy. Two thermal signatures approaching from the east, he reported, checking the security tablet. Moving slowly, clearly trained. Probably ex-military like Dominic Reeves. Claire nodded, accepting the handgun he offered. What's the plan? We use the terrain to our advantage. They don't know we've detected them yet. I'll circle around behind. You stay here as backup. Be careful, Claire said quietly. Emma needs you. Their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Mason was gone, slipping out the back door and into the forest like a shadow. The mountain terrain was familiar to him, in a way it wouldn't be to the intruders. He moved with silent efficiency, using the trees and undergrowth for cover, as he circled wide around the approaching threat. Through gaps in the foliage, he caught glimpses of the intruders. Two men in tactical gear, moving with the disciplined caution of professionals. They carried compact submachine guns and communicated via hand signals, confirming Mason's suspicion that these were no ordinary thugs. He positioned himself carefully, waiting until they had passed before emerging behind them. The first man sensed something and began to turn, but too late. Mason's attack was swift and silent, a precise chokehold that rendered the man unconscious within seconds. The second intruder reacted quickly, bringing his weapon to bear, but Mason was already moving. He knocked the gun aside and delivered a powerful strike to the man's solar plexus, following with a blow to the head that sent him crumpling to the ground. Mason secured both men with zip ties from his tactical vest, then searched them thoroughly. No identification, but their equipment was high-end, the kind used by private military contractors. One of them carried a satellite phone, which Mason pocketed before dragging both unconscious men deeper into the forest away from the cabin. When he returned, Claire was waiting on the porch, weapon ready, her posture betraying her military training. Two neutralized, Mason reported. Professional contractors, well-equipped. This wasn't a random search party. They knew exactly where to look. Claire lowered her gun. How was that possible? We were careful. Mason's expression darkened. There's only one explanation. We have another leak. Dave? Claire suggested hesitantly. Mason shook his head firmly. Never. Dave would die before betraying me, but... He paused, a terrible suspicion forming. The phone I called him on, it was new, but if the store's security cameras were compromised, they could have tracked the call, Claire finished, triangulated our location. Mason nodded grimly. We need to move. They'll have reported in already, which means more will be coming. Inside, they quickly gathered essential supplies. Mason retrieved Emma from the hidden room, explaining they needed to go on an adventure in the woods. To his relief, his daughter seemed to view the situation as an exciting game rather than a dangerous flight. Where are we going? Claire asked as they prepared to leave. There's an old fire lookout tower about 5 miles north, Mason explained. Abandoned now, but my grandfather used to take me there. Defensible position, good visibility. We can regroup there. The journey through the forest was challenging, especially for Emma, but the girl showed remarkable resilience. Mason carried her when the terrain grew too difficult, while Claire navigated using the map he'd provided. Despite her injuries, she maintained a steady pace, occasionally wincing, but never complaining. By mid-afternoon, they reached the lookout tower, a weathered wooden structure perched atop a rocky outcropping, offering commanding views of the surrounding valleys. Mason secured the location while Claire helped Emma climb the steep stairs. The tower's interior was basic but offered shelter. A single room with windows on all sides, a small wood stove, and the remnants of furniture left by long-departed forest rangers. Mason quickly established a perimeter, setting up improvised alarms using techniques he'd learned in special forces. We should be safe here for a while, he told Claire as Emma explored the tower's corners. But we need a new plan. The board meeting is still 2 days away. Claire nodded, her expression resolute despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. We need to get the evidence to someone we can trust, someone Alexander can't touch. I have an idea about that, Mason said. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're up against. Those men weren't just sent to capture you. They were equipped for a kill mission. A shadow crossed Claire's face. Alexander must be getting desperate. The board meeting is his last chance to stop me. It's more than that now, Mason said quietly, ensuring Emma was out of earshot. If there's evidence connecting Blackwood to Rebecca's death, He has even more reason to silence you, to silence both of us. Claire met his gaze, understanding the gravity of their situation. What do we do? Mason considered their options. Dave, we need his help, but we can't risk another call. There's a dead drop system we established years ago, a way to communicate securely in emergencies. How does it work? There's a storage locker in Ridgewood, registered under a false name. Dave checks it every day when situations are hot. If I can get a message there. But Ridgewood is hours away, Claire pointed out, and likely under surveillance. Mason nodded grimly. That's why I'm going alone. Tonight. You'll stay here with Emma, where it's safe. That's too dangerous, Claire protested. If they catch you, they won't, Mason said with quiet confidence. This is what I was trained for. Their discussion was interrupted by Emma, who had discovered an old pair of binoculars left in the tower. Daddy, look, I can see everything, she exclaimed, peering through the dusty lenses. I can see our cabin from here. Mason joined her at the window, taking the opportunity to scan the surrounding forest. Through the binoculars, he could indeed make out the cabin in the distance, and the dark SUVs now parked beside it. At least 4 vehicles with figures moving purposefully around the property. More of Alexander's men, Claire said softly, having followed his gaze. They're searching the area. Mason watched grimly as the men began to fan out from the cabin, clearly preparing for a systematic search of the surrounding forest. They're organized. Professionals. This isn't just corporate security anymore. Alexander has connections with private military contractors, Claire explained. Former special operations. Mercenaries. He's called in serious resources. Emma, oblivious to the danger, continued excitedly pointing out features of the landscape. Mason exchanged a meaningful look with Claire before gently taking the binoculars from his daughter. Hey, Em, why don't you set up your drawing supplies? You could make a picture of the view for Miss Claire. As Emma happily complied, Mason drew Claire to the opposite side of the tower, keeping his voice low. The situation's escalated beyond what I anticipated. These aren't just hired thugs. They're conducting a professional manhunt. Claire's expression was grim, but resolute. I've underestimated how far Alexander would go. This is beyond corporate rivalry. He's acting like a cornered animal. Which makes him even more dangerous, Mason agreed. We need to change our approach. He outlined a new plan, more aggressive than his original idea, but necessary given the forces arrayed against them. Instead of trying to evade Alexander's men, they would need to gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, and potentially take the fight to Alexander himself. If we can get concrete evidence linking him to Rebecca's death, Mason explained, we'd have leverage beyond just the corporate malfeasance. Murder changes everything. Claire nodded slowly. The USB drive contains financial records that might help. Payments to contractors, suspicious transactions around that time period. Then that's our focus, Mason decided. We analyze that data tonight, identify key players, then I make contact with Dave tomorrow. As darkness fell, they prepared for the night ahead. Mason constructed simple beds using emergency blankets in the tower's abandoned furniture. Emma, exhausted from the day's adventure, fell asleep quickly, clutching her stuffed elephant. With his daughter safely asleep, Mason joined Claire at the small table where she had set up the laptop. The USB drive's contents glowed on the screen, casting blue light across their focused faces. Let's start with financial transactions around the time of Rebecca's accident, Mason suggested. Any unusual payments, especially to security contractors. Claire nodded, her fingers moving skillfully across the keyboard. I've been cross-referencing everything with employee records, looking for connections. For hours, they worked in companionable silence, occasionally sharing discoveries or theories. The picture that emerged was disturbing, a systematic pattern of eliminating obstacles to Blackwood's operations, whether environmental activists, whistleblowers, or investigative journalists. Look at this, Claire said eventually, pointing to a series of transactions. 3 days before Rebecca's accident, a payment of $250,000 to a shell company called Sentinel Strategic Solutions. The same company received another payment 1 day after. Mason leaned closer. Can you trace Sentinel? Claire was already typing. It's buried under layers of incorporation, but yes. Ultimately owned by Catherine Reynolds through an offshore account. Catherine. Mason repeated, the name bitter on his tongue. The same woman who betrayed you to Alexander. She handles the deniable operations, Claire confirmed grimly. The things that can never be traced back to Blackwood directly. Mason's jaw tightened as the evidence mounted. Not just circumstantial connections anymore, but a clear financial trail linking Blackwood, specifically Catherine Reynolds, to the timing of Rebecca's death. There's more, Claire said, her voice dropping. Sentinel contracted with a man named Victor Krause around that time. Former military, specializes in accident staging. Mason felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. That's it. That's the connection. They killed Rebecca to prevent her story from derailing the Terrigen acquisition. Claire reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm so sorry, Mason. My family's company, what they did. Not you, Mason said firmly, meeting her eyes. You've been fighting to change things, to fix what your father and Alexander built. Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Claire's expression shifted, a new determination hardening her features. We need to take this to the FBI, she said. The evidence about weapons sales might be complex corporate crime, but murder, that's something they can't ignore. Mason nodded slowly. But we have to be careful. Alexander likely has contacts in law enforcement. We need someone trustworthy. I might know someone, Claire said hesitantly. Agent Diane Chen with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She's been investigating Blackwood for years, quietly building a case. She approached me about becoming a confidential informant 6 months ago. Chen, Mason repeated, his mind working. Any relation to Dave? His sister, Claire confirmed, looking surprised. You know her? Mason gave a short laugh, the first genuine amusement he'd felt in days. Dave mentioned his sister was FBI, but I had no idea she was investigating Blackwood. That's perfect. For the first time since they'd fled Ridgewood, a sense of possibility replaced their desperate scramble to survive. With Diane Chen's help, they might not only survive Alexander's hunt, but bring him to justice. For the weapons deals, for Rebecca's death, for all of it. As they continued working, the dynamic between them shifted subtly. No longer just allies of necessity, but partners with a shared purpose. Mason found himself watching Claire as she analyzed data, admiring her intelligence and determination. And occasionally he caught her watching him with a similar expression. Near midnight, with Emma still peacefully asleep, they took a break from their research. Mason stoked the small wood stove he'd cautiously lit, the flames casting a warm glow through the tower room. Claire accepted the cup of instant coffee he offered, wincing slightly as she shifted position. Her ribs were healing, but still tender. You should rest, Mason said, noticing her discomfort. We've made good progress. Claire shook her head. I'll rest when Alexander is behind bars, not before. The simple declaration, delivered without drama or self-pity, struck Mason powerfully. In his military career, he'd known few people with such quiet determination. Why did you become CEO? He asked suddenly. From what you've said about your childhood, it doesn't sound like something you wanted. Claire looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. I didn't, initially. I studied environmental science in college, my small rebellion against the family legacy. But then I saw what Blackwood was becoming under my father. The damage it was doing. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I realized I had two choices. Walk away completely and let the company continue its destructive path, or take control and try to change it from within. I chose the harder path. No regrets? Mason asked. Many, Claire admitted with a wry smile. Every time I compromise to keep the board happy. Every time progress comes too slowly. But when I see the actual changes, the sustainable projects we've launched, the harmful practices we've ended, I know it's worth it. Mason nodded, understanding perfectly. It was the same principle that had guided his military service. Sometimes you had to work within a flawed system to change it. What about you? Claire asked. Special Forces to hospital security is quite a transition. After Rebecca died, Emma became my priority, Mason explained simply. I couldn't risk overseas deployments anymore. And the security job, it's predictable, structured. gave me space to handle my grief and PTSD while still providing for Emma. And the garage work, Mason smiled slightly. That's for me. I've always loved fixing things, understanding how they work, making broken things whole again. It's therapeutic. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Emma's soft breathing from her makeshift bed. There was something powerful about this moment. Two people who had seen the worst of humanity finding understanding in each other's company. When this is over, Claire said finally, what will you do? If we can prove Alexander's a connection to Rebecca's death? Mason hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. His focus had been entirely on survival, on protecting Emma and helping Claire reach the board meeting. I don't know, he admitted. Get justice for Rebecca. Make sure Emma understands what kind of woman her mother was. He paused. Beyond that, I haven't planned. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. For so long, my entire focus has been on changing Blackwood, on undoing my father's legacy. I've never really thought about after. Their eyes met across the small space, a moment of recognition passing between them. Two people who had defined themselves by their missions, their responsibilities, suddenly glimpsing possibilities beyond. The moment was broken by a small sound from outside, barely perceptible, but Mason's trained senses immediately went on alert. He raised a hand for silence, moving carefully to the window. In the moonlit forest below, shadows moved with purpose, multiple figures approaching the tower with tactical precision. Mason's heart sank as he counted at least 6 men, all carrying weapons, all converging on their position. They found us, he whispered to Claire, who had joined him at the window. At least 6, maybe more in the trees. Fear flashed across Claire's face, quickly replaced by determination. How? We were so careful. Mason's mind raced through possibilities. The tower was relatively remote, not marked on modern maps. They had approached carefully, leaving minimal traces. Unless... His gaze fell on Emma's stuffed elephant, clutched tightly even in sleep. The beloved toy that went everywhere with his daughter. Emma's elephant, he said grimly. They could have planted a tracker in it when they tried to take her from school. Understanding dawned in Claire's eyes. That's why they seem so confident, so organized. They've been following our exact movements. Mason was already moving, gently extracting the stuffed animal from Emma's arms without waking her. A quick examination confirmed his suspicion, a small, sophisticated tracking device sewn into one of the seams. Clever bastards, he muttered, thinking quickly. We need to use this, create a diversion. Claire watched as he swiftly outlined a plan, using the tracker to mislead Alexander's men while they escaped in another direction. It was risky, but with the element of surprise, they might succeed. I'll take the elephant down the south trail, Mason explained quietly. Make them think we're fleeing that way. You wait 15 minutes, then take Emma down the east path to the old ranger station. I'll circle back and meet you there. Claire's expression tightened with concern. You'll be outnumbered. If they catch you, they won't, Mason assured her with the confidence of someone who had survived worse odds. This is what I was trained for. They worked quickly, gathering only essential supplies into 2 small packs. Mason showed Claire the east trail on his map and gave her his spare weapon. Remember, he said as he prepared to leave, 15 minutes, then go. Don't wait for me if there's trouble. Claire caught his arm. Be careful, Mason. Emma needs you. She hesitated, then added softly, I need you too. The simple declaration hung between them. Charged with meaning, neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Mason nodded once, his hand briefly covering hers before he slipped out of the tower and into the darkness. The forest welcomed him like an old friend, shadows providing cover as he moved swiftly away from the tower, Emma's elephant secured in his pack. He deliberately left signs of passage, broken twigs, disturbed undergrowth, leading Alexander's men in the wrong direction. When he judged he'd gone far enough, Mason set the stuffed animal prominently against a tree and continued south, now moving with his full stealth capabilities. As expected, the pursuit soon followed, drawn by the tracker's signal. He counted 6 men initially, with 2 more joining from another direction. 8 total, more than he'd anticipated, and all heavily armed. These weren't just security contractors anymore. They moved with the precision of special operations personnel. Mason circled wide around them, using the terrain to mask his approach back toward the ranger station where Claire and Emma would be heading. The night forest was his ally, each shadow and sound familiar from a lifetime of wilderness training. He was halfway back when he heard the first shouts. Alexander's men discovering the abandoned toy, realizing they'd been tricked. Their disciplined search pattern immediately shifted, spreading out to cover more ground. Mason increased his pace, moving as quickly as silence would allow. Claire and Emma would be on the trail by now, vulnerable until they reached the ranger station. He needed to reach them first, to secure their escape route. The eastern trail followed an old stream bed, winding through dense forest before emerging near the abandoned ranger station. Mason cut across country, taking a direct route that saved precious minutes, but required navigating difficult terrain in near darkness. He was within sight of the trail when he heard it. The soft, rhythmic sound of someone moving through the forest ahead. Too heavy for Claire or Emma, too deliberate for wildlife. One of Alexander's men had guessed their escape route. Mason froze, becoming one with the shadows as he assessed the situation. A single figure moved along the trail, weapon ready, clearly anticipating an encounter. The man's night vision goggles gave him an advantage in the darkness, but also limited his peripheral vision. Mason circled behind, selecting his moment with practiced patience. When the man paused to check his radio, Mason struck, swift, silent, and precise. A practiced chokehold rendered the man unconscious within seconds. After securing the mercenary with his own zip ties, Mason appropriated the night vision goggles and radio. The chatter on the comm channel confirmed his fears. Alexander's men had guessed their strategy and were converging on the eastern trail. Moving with renewed urgency, Mason continued toward the ranger station. He needed to reach Claire and Emma before the search teams did. The old ranger station appeared through the trees, a small wooden building, long abandoned but still structurally sound. Mason approached cautiously, scanning for signs of Claire and Emma. A flicker of movement at one window confirmed they had arrived safely and were waiting inside. He was about to move toward the building when the radio crackled with a new transmission. All units converge on the ranger station. Heat signatures detected inside. Prepare for extraction of primary target. Secondary targets expendable. The cold, professional delivery of what amounted to a death sentence for him, and Emma sent ice through Mason's veins. Alexander wasn't just trying to silence Claire anymore. He was eliminating all witnesses. Mason keyed the radio, mimicking the clipped tones of the mercenaries. Copy that. East approach secured, moving to position. And the deception would buy them minutes at most, but minutes might be enough. He needed to get Claire and Emma out before the full team arrived. Using the cover of darkness, Mason approached the ranger station from the blind side, tapping softly on the window in a pattern he'd taught Claire earlier. Three quick, two slow. The window opened immediately, Claire's relieved face appearing in the gap. They're coming, Mason whispered urgently, multiple teams converging on this position. We need to move now. Claire nodded, already helping Emma prepare. The girl was sleepy but cooperative, trusting her father's urgency without question. There's an old maintenance tunnel, Mason explained quickly, used for drainage during spring floods. It leads under the ridge to the north. If we can reach it before they surround us, we have a chance. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind the ranger station, half hidden by years of undergrowth. Mason cleared it quickly while Claire helped Emma into her jacket. The tunnel itself was narrow and damp, barely large enough for an adult to crawl through, but it offered their only chance of escape. Emma goes first, Mason instructed. Then you, Claire. I'll cover our tracks and follow. Emma, sensing the gravity of the situation, didn't protest as Claire helped her into the dark tunnel opening. The girl had always been brave, but her quiet determination in this moment filled Mason with fierce pride. It's like a secret passage in my adventure books. Right, Daddy? Emma whispered. Mason managed a smile, kneeling to kiss her forehead. Exactly right, Pumpkin. Be very quiet and follow the tunnel all the way to the end. Miss Claire will be right behind you. As Emma disappeared into the darkness, Claire turned to Mason, her expression a complex mixture of fear, determination, and something deeper. Mason, she began, but he shook his head. Later, he promised. We'll talk about everything later. Right now, keep Emma safe. Claire nodded, understanding the priority. Before she could move toward the tunnel, however, the distant sound of breaking branches signaled the approach of Alexander's men. "Go," Mason urged. "I'll delay them, then follow." For a moment, Claire seemed about to protest. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, fierce kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't in that moment: gratitude, fear, hope, possibility. Then she was gone, sliding into the tunnel after Emma, leaving Mason to secure their escape. He worked quickly, covering the tunnel entrance with debris before taking up a position that would draw attention away from their escape route. The night vision goggles revealed multiple heat signatures approaching from the west, at least 4 men moving with tactical precision. Mason pulled the radio from his belt, switching to the channel he'd heard earlier. "This is Mason Hayes," he broadcast clearly. "I know you're after Claire Blackwood, but you should know something. I have evidence connecting Alexander Blackwood to the murder of Rebecca Hayes 3 years ago. Evidence I've already sent to the FBI." The radio crackled with sudden silence, the advancing heat signatures pausing in their movement. Then a new voice came through, cultured, authoritative, with the clipped tones of elite education. "Mr. Hayes, this is Alexander Blackwood. I believe we should talk." The voice sent a chill through Mason, not because of any inherent menace, but because of its perfect reasonableness. This was the voice of someone accustomed to power, to having his words obeyed without question. "Nothing to talk about," Mason replied. "Your men tried to take my daughter. That makes this personal." "A regrettable overstep," Alexander said smoothly. "Dominic was instructed to simply gather information, not to involve the child. He's been disciplined for that error." Mason didn't believe the explanation for a second. "What do you want, Alexander?" "The same thing you want, Mr. Hayes. Resolution. Safety for those we care about." A pause, perfectly timed. "My sister is unwell, has been for some time. Her accusations against me, her paranoia, these are symptoms of a condition our family has struggled to manage privately." The calculated manipulation in Alexander's tone only hardened Mason's resolve. "Save it. I've seen the evidence. I know what Blackwood Industries did in Kajari. I know about Catherine Reynolds and Sentinel Strategic Solutions. I know about Victor Krauss." For the first time, Alexander's composure slipped. A fractional pause revealing Mason's words had hit their mark. "You're mistaken," Alexander recovered quickly, "but I understand your concerns. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Financial compensation for any misunderstandings. A fresh start for you and your daughter, somewhere pleasant. Switzerland, perhaps, or New Zealand." Mason almost laughed at the transparent attempt. "Not interested." "Mr. Hayes," Alexander's voice hardened slightly, "be reasonable. You're outnumbered, outgunned, with a child to protect. Claire's evidence won't stand up to scrutiny. It will be dismissed as the desperate fabrications of an unstable mind. You have no winning move here." Mason scanned the forest, noting that the heat signatures had begun moving again, spreading out to surround his position. Alexander was stalling, keeping him talking while his men maneuvered. "Maybe not," Mason conceded, "but neither do you. Because win or lose tonight, this all comes out tomorrow. Every piece of evidence Claire gathered, everything about Rebecca, all of it goes public at 9 a.m. The bluff was calculated, designed to create uncertainty. So you can either back off now or face the consequences of whatever happens here." The radio went silent for several seconds. When Alexander spoke again, the veneer of civility had vanished entirely. "Find him," he ordered his men. "Find all of them. No witnesses." Mason switched off the radio, satisfied he'd bought Claire and Emma valuable time. Now he needed to create a diversion, something that would draw Alexander's men away from the tunnel's exit point. Moving swiftly through the underbrush, Mason circled behind the approaching team. He had limited resources, but years of Special Forces training had taught him to improvise. Using items from his pack and materials gathered from the ranger station, he crafted several rudimentary distractions. Nothing lethal, but effective enough to create confusion. The first device, a simple timer attached to a flashlight, he positioned far to the west of the tunnel exit. The second, a noisemaker using the mercenaries' radio, he placed to the south. When both distractions activated simultaneously, the effect was immediate. The search team split, half moving toward the light, half toward the sound, leaving a gap in their perimeter that Mason could exploit. He slipped through the opening, moving north toward the tunnel exit where Claire and Emma should be emerging. The terrain grew steeper, rockier, as he approached the ridge's northern face. The tunnel would exit into a small ravine, sheltered from view by dense undergrowth. Mason reached the area and paused, listening intently. No sound of pursuit yet, but Alexander's men wouldn't be fooled for long. "Claire?" he called softly. "Emma?" A rustle from the undergrowth. Then Claire appeared, Emma close behind her. Both were muddy and damp from the tunnel, but unharmed. Emma ran to him immediately, small arms wrapping around his waist. "Daddy! The tunnel was so dark, but I wasn't scared because I knew you were coming." Mason hugged her tightly, relief washing through him. "That's my brave girl." He looked up at Claire, who was watching them with a mixture of relief and determination. "We need to keep moving. Alexander's men will regroup soon." "Where to?" Claire asked. "They seem to be tracking us no matter where we go." Mason considered their options. They needed transportation, communication, and backup, none of which were available in these remote woods. "There's a small town about 10 miles north," he decided. "If we can reach it by morning, we might be able to contact Dave securely." Claire nodded, helping Emma adjust her small backpack. "Lead the way." As they set off through the darkened forest, Mason maintained a vigilant watch for pursuit. The night had grown colder, their breath forming small clouds in the mountain air. Emma, despite her initial bravery, was clearly exhausted, struggling to keep pace. After half a mile, Mason lifted her onto his back, her small arms wrapped trustingly around his neck. "Just like our hiking trips, remember?" he encouraged her. "You can rest now. I've got you." Emma's weight was nothing compared to the rucksacks he'd carried in Afghanistan, but combined with the stress and exertion of the night, Mason could feel fatigue beginning to set in. Beside him, Claire moved with determined grace despite her healing injuries, occasionally wincing but never complaining. They walked in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and Alexander's search teams. The forest gradually thinned as they descended the northern slope, moonlight illuminating their path through the trees. "Mason," Claire said softly as they paused for a brief rest, "what Alexander said about me being unwell, that's the narrative he's been building for months, painting me as unstable, paranoid." "I know," Mason assured her. "Classic gaslighting. Make others question your sanity to undermine your credibility." Claire nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Some days, when everyone around me seemed to believe his version, I almost started doubting myself." "That's how abusers work," Mason said, adjusting Emma's sleeping form on his back. "Isolation, manipulation, making you question your own reality. But you fought back. You gathered evidence, built a case. That takes real strength." His words seemed to fortify her, straightening her posture despite her exhaustion. They continued their journey, the pre-dawn light gradually softening the eastern sky. As the forest gave way to more open terrain, Mason spotted something that changed their immediate prospects. An old logging road, and beside it a maintenance silo shed that might contain equipment or even transportation. "Wait here," he instructed Claire, carefully transferring the sleeping Emma to her arms. "I'll check it out." The shed's padlock yielded easily to Mason's skills. Inside, he discovered exactly what they needed: an aging but functional ATV likely used by Forest Service workers. Hot wiring the vehicle took less than a minute, a skill he'd learned not in special forces, but from a misspent adolescence before the military had given him purpose. When he returned with the quietly rumbling ATV, Claire's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd seen since finding her on his doorstep. "You're full of surprises, Mason Hayes," she said as he helped settle Emma onto the seat between them. "You have no idea," he replied with a half-smile of his own. The ATV transformed their journey, covering ground that would have taken hours on foot. By dawn, they had reached the outskirts of Pinewood, a small town serving the region's hunting and tourism industries. They stopped at the edge of town, Mason cutting the engine as they assessed their situation. All three were dirty, disheveled, and clearly had spent the night in the wilderness. Emma was awake now, but quiet, her usual chatter subdued by fatigue and the gravity of their situation. "We need to clean up before we attract attention," Mason observed, "and find a secure way to contact Dave." The town was just waking up, early workers heading to shifts at the diner and gas station. Mason spotted what they needed: a small motel at the edge of town, the kind of place that asked few questions and accepted patch. The Mountain View Motel had seen better days, its neon sign missing several letters, but it offered hot water and privacy. The sleepy clerk barely glanced at them as Mason paid for a room in cash, assuming they were just another family on a camping trip. Room 8 was basic but clean. 2 beds, a bathroom with a shower, and mercifully, no signs of surveillance. Mason secured the door and windows while Claire helped Emma into the shower, washing away the dirt and stress of their forced escape. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Mason decided. "I'll find a secure way to contact Dave. Then we'll formulate our next move." Claire nodded, her exhaustion evident now that they had reached relative safety. "The board meeting is tomorrow morning. We're running out of time." "We'll make it," Mason assured her with more confidence than he felt. "One way or another, Alexander will face justice for the weapons deals, for Rebecca, for all of it." Emma emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel too large for her small frame, her hair dripping onto the worn carpet. Despite everything, she managed a tired smile. "Daddy, I'm hungry. Can we get pancakes?" The simple, normal request amid their extraordinary circumstances nearly broke Mason's heart. "Absolutely, Pumpkin. Pancakes coming up." While Claire took her turn in the shower, Mason ordered breakfast delivered from the diner across the street. The normalcy of sharing a meal gradually eased some of the tension, especially for Emma, who seemed to bounce back with the resilience of childhood. After breakfast, with Emma occupied drawing at the small table, Mason and Claire huddled by the window, planning their next steps. "I need to reach Dave," Mason said quietly. "He can provide backup, secure transport to get you to that board meeting." "And if Alexander's watching Dave too?" Claire asked. "Then we go to Plan B," Mason replied. "Diane Chen, your FBI contact. If we can reach her directly, bypass any local law enforcement Alexander might influence." Claire nodded slowly. "She gave me an emergency contact protocol, a specific phone number and verification code. But I memorized it and destroyed the paper. Standard security practice." "Smart," Mason approved. "We'll need a burner phone, one that can't be easily traced." Their planning was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mason instantly went on alert, motioning for Claire to take Emma into the bathroom, while he approached the door cautiously, hand on his concealed weapon. "Who is it?" he called. "Housekeeping," came the reply. A woman's voice, local accent, seemingly ordinary. Mason remained suspicious. "We don't need service. Please come back later." "Of course, sir. Sorry to disturb you." He listened to retreating footsteps, then carefully peered through the window to confirm the housekeeper was genuinely walking away. What he saw instead froze his blood. The woman was speaking into a radio as she rounded the corner of the building. "We've been found," he said urgently as Claire emerged from the bathroom. "We need to move, now." After their narrow escape from the motel, leaving behind confused staff and the blaring fire alarm, Mason guided their stolen truck along back roads. They were already 3 miles outside town when the first police car passed them, heading toward the motel. Mason kept his speed steady, precisely at the limit, attracting no attention on the rural highway. The housekeeper had been speaking into a radio, unmistakable proof that Alexander's forces had tracked them to Pinewood. How they'd managed it remained a mystery, but Mason had no time to solve it now. Survival came first. "Out the bathroom window," Mason directed, already gathering their meager belongings. "I'll create a diversion." Claire nodded, guiding Emma toward the small window while Mason retrieved his weapon. He checked the magazine with practiced movements, his expression hardening into the focused mask of a soldier. "We'll meet behind the diner where the delivery trucks park," he told Claire. "Be there in 5 minutes. If I don't show, take Emma and find Agent Chen." "Mason," Claire began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "No time, go." After they disappeared through the window, he waited 30 seconds, then stepped into the hallway, deliberately making his presence known. As expected, 2 men in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of professionals, immediately converged from opposite ends of the corridor. "Gentlemen," Mason called out, "I believe you're looking for me." Without waiting for a response, he triggered the fire alarm on the wall beside him. The shrill wail instantly filled the small motel, and doors began opening as startled guests emerged to investigate. In the momentary confusion, Mason slipped through a side exit, using the gathering crowd as cover. By the time he reached the rendezvous point, Claire and Emma were already waiting, tucked behind a dumpster that shielded them from street view. "Daddy," Emma whispered, relief flooding her face. "We need transportation," Claire said, all business, despite the fear evident in her eyes. Mason scanned the delivery area. "There," he said, indicating an aging pickup truck whose driver was unloading boxes at the diner's back entrance. "It's our best option." Claire understood immediately. "I'll distract him. You get Emma in the truck." Before Mason could protest, Claire had stepped forward, transforming her posture and expression into that of a harried business traveler. The ease with which she adopted the persona reminded Mason that she hadn't become CEO of a global corporation without considerable social skills. "Excuse me," she called to the delivery man, her voice carrying just the right note of entitled impatience. "I was told I could arrange a shuttle to the regional airport here?" As the man turned to address Claire, Mason and Emma moved silently toward the truck. The keys were still in the ignition, a common practice in small towns where vehicle theft was rare. Within seconds, they were inside, Mason hot-wiring the engine as a precaution in case the driver had a remote key fob. Claire wrapped up her conversation with an apologetic smile and a gesture toward her phone, as if receiving an important call. She walked briskly away from the confused driver and slipped into the passenger seat just as Mason got the engine running. They were 3 miles outside town before the first police car passed them, heading toward the motel. Mason kept his speed steady, precisely at the limit, attracting no attention on the rural highway. "We have maybe an hour before they organize a proper search," he estimated. "We need to ditch this truck and find secure communications." Claire nodded, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "Dave is still our best option for immediate help, but Alexander will be watching him, and the board meeting is tomorrow morning. We're running out of time." "Then we go straight to Agent Chen," Mason decided, "your FBI contact. If she's Dave's sister, we might be able to reach her through family channels Alexander wouldn't know about." "Dave's parents," what Claire suggested. "Would they help us?" Mason nodded. "The Chens treated me like family after Afghanistan. Their restaurant is about 2 hours from here." Decision made, they drove in tense silence, Mason taking secondary roads to avoid main highways where roadblocks might be established. Emma dozed against Claire's side, exhaustion finally overcoming her determination to stay alert. "She's incredible," Claire murmured, gently stroking Emma's hair. "So brave, so resilient." "She's had to be," Mason replied, his eyes constantly scanning the road ahead. "After Rebecca died, it was like we healed each other. She gave me a reason to keep going, and I taught her that safety comes from preparation, not fear." Claire studied his profile in the morning light. "You're a good father, Mason, the kind every child deserves." The simple statement touched something deep in Mason's chest. Recognition and validation of the effort he'd poured into raising Emma alone, the constant doubts he battled about whether he was enough for his daughter. "What about you?" he asked after a moment. "Did you ever think about having children?" Claire's expression turned wistful. "The company became my child, in a way. The thing I nurtured tried to shape into something better than it was." She paused. "My parents viewed me as an asset, not a person. I always swore if I ever had children, they'd know they were loved for themselves, not for what they could accomplish." The vulnerability in her admission created a new layer of understanding between them, recognition of shared values beneath their very different life experiences. They abandoned the truck at a highway rest stop, wiping it clean of prints before walking a mile to a bus station. The rural bus service was limited but would take them within 5 miles of the Chen family restaurant. "Remember, keep your head down," Mason instructed Claire as they boarded. "Anyone could be watching." The bus journey passed without incident, Emma entertaining herself with the travel games Mason always carried in his go-bag. By early afternoon, they were walking the final stretch toward Golden Dragon, the restaurant Dave's parents had run for 30 years. The modest establishment sat on the outskirts of Millfield, a town just large enough to support a diverse dining scene, but small enough to maintain the personal connections that had defined Mason's post-military life. The familiar red and gold sign brought a wave of nostalgia. Sunday meals with Dave's family had been a lifeline during his darkest days after Rebecca's death. Mrs. Chen spotted them the moment they entered, her weathered face registering as surprise followed by immediate concern. She hurried over, speaking in rapid Mandarin to her husband before ushering them toward the back of the restaurant. "Mason, Emma, what trouble brings you here looking like this? She demanded, her accent thickening with worry. And who is this? This is Claire, Mason introduced as they were led into the Chen's private living quarters behind the restaurant. She's a friend who needs help. It's complicated, Mrs. Chen. The older woman nodded with the wisdom of someone who had fled political persecution in her youth. Complicated, I understand. First, you eat. Then, you explain. The simple meal Mrs. Chen prepared was the first proper food they'd had in 24 hours. Emma ate with relish, momentarily forgetting the dangers that had brought them there. Claire, despite her exhaustion, remembered to compliment Mrs. Chen's cooking, earning an approving nod from the matriarch. When they'd finished, Mr. Chen locked the restaurant door and turned the sign to closed, an unusual move in the middle of the afternoon. The message was clear. Family matters came first. Now, Xiaosh, Mrs. Chen said, sitting across from them, what kind of trouble has found you? Mason explained the situation with careful precision, omitting classified details, but conveying the essential truth, that Claire possessed evidence of corporate crimes, that Alexander wanted to silence her, and that they needed to contact Diane Chen urgently and securely. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When Mason mentioned the connection to Rebecca's death, her hand reached across the table to cover his. We wondered, she said softly. The accident never made sense to us. Rebecca was too careful a driver. The simple validation of his suspicions brought a lump to Mason's throat. We have evidence now, he managed, or at least strong connections. But we need Diane's help to make it official before the board meeting tomorrow. Mr. Chen, who had remained silent throughout, suddenly stood. I call Diane now. Special phone, very secure. CIA cannot listen. FBI cannot listen. Only family. As he disappeared into the back room, Mrs. Chen turned to Claire. You need rest, both of you. We have beds upstairs. Emma knows the way. Emma, who had been quietly drawing at the end of the table, looked up hopefully. Can I show Miss Claire the fish tank in my room? The one Uncle Dave got me? Of course, little one, Mrs. Chen smiled. Your special room is always ready for you. As Emma led Claire upstairs, chattering about the tropical fish Dave had installed during one of their visits, Mason felt some of the tension leave his body. The Chen family home had always been a sanctuary. Now, Mrs. Chen said once they were alone, tell me the rest, the part you didn't say in front of your daughter. Mason smiled grimly. Nothing escaped Mrs. Chen's notice. Alexander Blackwood is dangerous in ways I didn't fully appreciate. He's not just trying to silence Claire. He's willing to eliminate anyone who gets in his way, including Emma. This man ordered Rebecca's death? Mrs. Chen asked directly. I believe so, Mason nodded, or at least authorized it through intermediaries. Claire has financial records that create a strong connection. Mrs. Chen's expression hardened into something Mason had rarely seen, the fierce protectiveness of a woman who had survived revolution and exodus to protect her family. Then he must be stopped, not just for justice, but for Emma's future safety. Before Mason could respond, Mr. Chen returned, his expression both worried and determined. Diane is coming. 3 hours. She brings help. Did you use secure communication? Mason asked. Mr. Chen looked almost offended. Family code. Same one we used when communist officials searched for dissidents. No technology, no phones can understand. Mason relaxed slightly. If anyone could maintain truly secure communications in the digital age, it was the Chen family, with their experience evading government surveillance in China decades earlier. You rest now, Mrs. Chen insisted. We watch. No one comes here without us knowing. Exhaustion finally overcame Mason's vigilance. He climbed the stairs to find Emma already asleep in her special room, a space the Chens had maintained for their honorary granddaughter, complete with the promised fish tank and other small comforts. Claire sat beside the sleeping child, her own fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. When Mason entered, she looked up with a weary smile. She fell asleep mid-sentence about the bluefish, Claire said softly. I think the adrenaline finally wore off. Mason nodded, taking a seat in the room's small armchair. The Chens contacted Diane. She'll be here in a few hours. Can we trust her completely? Claire asked, the wariness of someone who had recently been betrayed evident in her voice. If Dave trusts her, so do I, Mason said simply. and the Chen's vouching for her is better than any security clearance. Claire seemed to accept this, her gaze returning to Emma's peaceful form. I never expected any of this when I started investigating Alexander. I thought it would be a straightforward corporate battle, difficult but contained within boardrooms and legal filings. The stakes got higher when you found the weapons connections, Mason observed. Those cross lines most corporate executives wouldn't. But Alexander did, Claire said, a note of self-recrimination in her voice. And I should have anticipated how far he'd go. I've known him all my life, seen his ruthlessness, his sense of entitlement. You couldn't have known he was behind Rebecca's death, Mason said firmly. That connection wasn't visible until we combined our knowledge. Claire met his gaze directly. If I had never come to your door that night, then Alexander would have continued unchecked, Mason interrupted, and Rebecca's death would have remained just another tragic accident. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've spent 3 years trying to rebuild a life for Emma, trying to move forward while feeling like something fundamental was missing. Not just Rebecca, but purpose, clarity. And now, Claire asked softly, now I have a chance to get justice for Rebecca, to eliminate a threat to Emma's future, and to help someone fighting for what's right against impossible odds. He smiled slightly. Special forces trained me to recognize worthy missions. This is one. Something shifted in Claire's expression. Relief mingled with a deeper emotion neither of them was ready to name. Thank you, she said simply, for believing in me when you had every reason not to. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities, before Mason broke it gently. We should both rest while we can. Tomorrow will require all our strength. Claire nodded, stretching out on the small daybed opposite Emma's. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, the lines of worry momentarily smoothed from her face. Mason allowed himself a final glance at the two sleeping figures, his daughter and the woman who had unexpectedly become essential to their future, before closing his eyes. For the first time in days, he permitted himself to fully relax, trusting the Chen family's vigilance to keep them safe. He woke to Mrs. Chen's gentle shake. They are here, she whispered. Diane and Dave. Come quickly. Downstairs, the restaurant remained closed to the public, but the back room had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Dave Chen, Mason's former second-in-command and Emma's honorary uncle, was setting up communications equipment while a woman Mason recognized as his sister reviewed documents spread across the table. Mason, Dave greeted him with the controlled relief of a soldier reunited with a comrade after a dangerous mission. They clasped hands briefly, communicating volumes in the simple gesture. You brought the cavalry, Mason observed, nodding toward the equipment. And then some, Dave confirmed. Eleanor Harrison is in custody. FBI picked her up this morning. She's already talking, trying to cut a deal. The news sent a jolt through Mason. She confirmed she was working for Blackwood? For 12 years, Diane Chen interjected, stepping forward to shake Mason's hand. Though they'd met at family gatherings, this was clearly Agent Chen rather than Dave's sister. Surveillance only, initially, then more active measures after your wife started investigating Terrigen. Mason absorbed this confirmation of his worst suspicions. She was positioned to watch me because of what I knew about Kajari. Diane nodded. Blackwood Industries maintained extensive files on all special operations personnel who might have encountered their black market weapons. You were flagged as high risk because of your intelligence background and your team's recovery of traceable weapons. The methodical, years-long surveillance of his family struck Mason anew. And Rebecca, what did Eleanor tell you? A shadow crossed Diane's professional demeanor. She claims no direct knowledge of the accident, but she admitted reporting Rebecca's investigation to Catherine Reynolds. The timing aligns with the financial transactions Claire uncovered. As if summoned by her name, Claire appeared on the stairs, Emma trailing sleepily behind her. Dave immediately brightened, kneeling to greet Emma with an enthusiastic hug that momentarily banished the tension in the room. Uncle Dave, did you bring me anything? Emma asked with the directness of childhood. Dave produced a small package from his pocket, a tradition he never forgot, even in crisis. A special compass, like the ones we used in the Army. It always points true north, no matter what. While Emma examined her gift, Claire approached Diane with professional composure that belied their desperate circumstances. Agent Chen, we've never officially met, but I appreciated your discretion when you approached me 6 months ago. Ms. Blackwood, Diane acknowledged, I've been building a case against your brother's weapons operations for years. Your evidence could be the missing piece. Then let's not waste time, Claire said, producing the USB drive from a hidden pocket. Everything I've gathered is here. Financial trails, shell companies, communications, and now potential connections to Rebecca Hayes' death. Diane accepted the drive with appropriate gravity. We'll need formal statements from both of you, but first, we need to discuss tomorrow's board meeting. Alexander will expect me to be there, Claire said. If I don't appear, he'll move immediately to have me declared mentally unfit, triggering the succession protocols that would make him CEO. And if you do appear, you'll be walking into extreme danger, Mason pointed out. Diane's expression remained carefully neutral. We have a third option. We've been monitoring Alexander's communications since Ms. Blackwood disappeared. He's scheduled an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow, physically present, not virtual. All board members are flying in tonight. He wants to control the environment, Claire realized. Make sure there are no digital records of what happens. Exactly, Diane confirmed, but it gives us an opportunity. We can secure the building before the meeting begins, position our people, and be ready to move when Alexander incriminates himself. You want to use Claire as bait, Mason said flatly, not bothering to hide his disapproval. I want to give Claire the opportunity to confront her brother with federal agents present and recording, Diane corrected. It's her choice. All eyes turned to Claire, who stood silent for a moment, weighing the options. I've spent 5 years trying to undo my family's damage, she said finally. I need to finish this face to face. Mason wanted to object, but recognized the determination in her eyes. The same steel he'd seen when she first admitted who she was on his couch, battered but unbowed. Then we do it together, he said instead. I have as much stake in this as you do. Diane looked like she wanted to argue but was interrupted by Dave. Mason's right. Alexander's people have proven they'll go to extreme measures. We need someone inside who can react to unexpected threats, someone with the right training. The siblings exchanged a look that suggested they'd had similar arguments before. Finally, Diane nodded. Fine, but you follow protocol exactly. This is an FBI operation, not a military one. The next hours passed in intense preparation. Mason provided a detailed statement about Rebecca's accident and the events of the past few days. Claire walked Diane through the evidence she'd gathered, highlighting the connections to weapons sales and the suspicious financial transactions around Rebecca's death. Dave, meanwhile, coordinated with an FBI tactical team that would secure the Blackwood Industries headquarters before dawn. Every detail was planned with military precision: entrance points, communications, contingencies. Emma thankfully remained largely oblivious to the specifics, content to spend time with her beloved Uncle Dave and the Chen family. Mason made time to sit with her, explaining that he and Claire needed to attend an important meeting the next day. Is it to stop the bad people who hurt Miss Claire? Emma asked perceptively. Mason nodded, never one to lie to his daughter. Yes, Agent Chen and Uncle Dave are helping us make sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else. Emma considered this with the serious expression that always reminded him of Rebecca. Like the superheroes in my books, they get justice. Something like that, Mason smiled. But real justice is usually less exciting than in books. Mostly it's about telling the truth and making sure evidence gets to the right people. Like Miss Claire's special computer stick? Mason blinked, surprised by his daughter's awareness. Yes, exactly like that. How did you know about it? Emma shrugged. I saw her hiding it in her sock and when we were running from the cabin. She said it was very important and had truth on it. Mason hugged his daughter, once again amazed by her observational skills. That's right, and tomorrow that truth is going to help a lot of people. That evening, a secure FBI vehicle transported Mason, Claire, and the Chen siblings to a safe house closer to the city. Emma remained with the elder Chens, who would take her to a secondary location unknown even to Mason, a precaution he reluctantly agreed was necessary. The safe house was sparse but functional, with separate rooms for planning and rest. As the others finalized tactical details, Mason found Claire standing alone by a window, staring at the distant city lights. Having second thoughts? He asked, joining her. No, she replied without hesitation. But I am thinking about what comes after. Assuming we succeed tomorrow, Blackwood Industries will need completely new leadership. The board will be in chaos once Alexander's crimes are exposed. You could step away entirely, Mason suggested. Let someone else clean up the mess. Claire shook her head. That would be easier, but not right. I need to ensure the transition happens properly, that the company truly changes course. She paused. But after that, I've been thinking about what you said, about purpose and clarity. And? And maybe it's time I built something of my own, something not shadowed by the Blackwood legacy. She turned to face him fully. What about you? After justice for Rebecca, what then? The question had been circling Mason's mind since their conversation at the Chen's home. I've been on autopilot for 3 years, he admitted, doing what needed to be done for Emma, but not really living. Recent events have reminded me there's more I can offer the world than just security shifts and garage repairs. Like protecting CEOs in distress? Claire suggested with a small smile. Like using my skills for something that matters, Mason corrected gently. Whether that's private security consulting, helping Dave's firm, or something else entirely. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating futures that suddenly seemed more open than they had in years. Whatever happens tomorrow, Claire said finally, I want you to know that meeting you and Emma, it changed something fundamental for me, reminded me what actually matters. Mason nodded, understanding completely. Some people go their whole lives without finding that clarity. Sometimes it takes losing everything to recognize what's essential. Their eyes met, a current of unspoken possibility passing between them. But now was not the time to explore it. Too much remained unresolved. Too many dangers still threatened. By unspoken agreement, they rejoined the others to review the final details for the morning's operation. Dawn broke clear and cold over the city as their convoy approached Blackwood Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that dominated the skyline. FBI teams had already secured the building, posing as enhanced security for the emergency board meeting. Mason and Claire were positioned in a conference room adjacent to the main boardroom, where they could monitor the proceedings through a sophisticated audio-visual setup installed overnight. Diane and her team occupied strategic positions throughout the executive floor, while Dave coordinated the tactical response team. Board members are arriving, reported an agent monitoring the lobby. Alexander Blackwood just entered the building with Catherine Reynolds. Claire took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation to come. She had changed into professional attire provided by the FBI, a tailored suit that projected authority despite the fading bruises on her face. Remember the plan, Diane instructed them. Claire enters once all board members are seated. Mason remains here as backup only. We need Alexander's explicit confirmation of his actions before we move in. Mason nodded, though he had already decided he wouldn't let Claire face her brother alone, regardless of the FBI's protocols. Some instincts ran too deep to override. Protecting civilians was ingrained in his operational DNA. On the monitors, they watched as 13 board members filed into the main boardroom. Alexander took position at the head of the table, Catherine standing at his right hand. His expression projected confidence, but Mason noted the tension in his shoulders, the slightly too tight grip on his leather portfolio. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began once everyone was seated, thank you for convening on such short notice. As you're aware, my sister's concerning behavior and subsequent disappearance have created an unprecedented situation requiring immediate action. He launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about Claire's supposed mental instability, painting a picture of paranoid delusions and erratic decision-making. Mason felt his jaw tighten as Alexander smoothly wove truth and lies together, using Claire's legitimate concerns about weapons sales as evidence of her persecution complex. Therefore, Alexander concluded, I am formally requesting the board invoke Section 7.3 of our charter, temporarily transferring CEO authority to me while we seek appropriate medical intervention for Claire. A murmur ran through the assembled board members. One older man, identified on the briefing documents as Gregory Peterson, the longest-serving board member, raised his hand. This is an extraordinary step, Alexander. Where is Claire now? Shouldn't she have the opportunity to address these concerns directly? Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. I wish that were possible, Gregory. Unfortunately, Claire's current whereabouts are unknown. Her security team lost track of her 3 days ago after she fled her apartment in a clearly distressed state. "That's my cue," Claire said quietly, straightening her jacket. Mason caught her arm. "I'm coming with you." "That's not the plan," Diane objected. "The plan just changed," Mason replied with the quiet authority that had once commanded special operations teams. "Alexander has proven he'll resort to violence. I'm not sending her in there unprotected." Diane looked like she wanted to argue but was interrupted by Dave. "He's right, Di. Our people are good, but Mason knows exactly what to watch for with Alexander's security team." After a moment's hesitation, Diane nodded. "Fine, but stay back unless absolutely necessary. We need Alexander's confession, not a confrontation." They moved quickly through the executive corridor, FBI agents falling into formation around them. At the boardroom's entrance, Claire paused, meeting Mason's eyes one last time. The look they exchanged contained volumes: determination, reassurance, and something deeper that would have to wait for a safer moment. Then Claire pushed open the door, stepping into the boardroom with the composed authority of someone taking back what was rightfully hers. "I believe you're discussing me," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "I'd prefer to speak for myself." The shock on Alexander's face quickly gave way to calculated recovery. "Claire," he said, infusing her name with perfectly calibrated concern. "We've been so worried. Where have you been?" "Recovering from the attack your men perpetrated," Claire replied evenly, gesturing to the still visible bruises on her face, "and gathering evidence of your illegal weapons sales, environmental violations, and corporate espionage." Alexander's expression hardened, but his voice remained solicitous for the board's benefit. "Claire, these delusions are exactly what concerns us." "These accusations are documented in extensive detail," Claire interrupted, removing a folder from her briefcase. She began distributing copies to each board member, including financial records of payments to shell companies, communications with sanctioned entities, and transactions with known arms dealers. Catherine Reynolds stepped forward, her professional demeanor intact despite the tension radiating from her. "Board members, while Claire clearly believes these allegations, they represent a fundamental misunderstanding of complex international financing structures." "They represent crimes, Catherine," Claire cut in sharply. "As do the payments Sentinel Strategic Solutions made to Victor Krauss 3 years ago, immediately before and after the death of Rebecca Hayes." The name dropped into the room like a stone, creating ripples of confusion among the board members. But Mason, watching carefully from near the door, saw the flash of alarm that crossed both Alexander's and Catherine's faces. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alexander recovered quickly. "Who is Rebecca Hayes, and what could she possibly have to do with Blackwood Industries?" "She was an investigative journalist," Claire explained for the board's benefit, "who discovered Terrigen's environmental violations just before Blackwood acquired the company, violations that would have derailed the acquisition if made public." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "She was also the wife of Mason Hayes, who stands behind me now." All eyes turned to Mason, who stepped forward to stand beside Claire. The sudden attention didn't faze him. He'd faced down warlords and insurgent leaders with the same steady gaze he now directed at Alexander. "Your security consultant, Eleanor Harrison, has already provided a statement to the FBI," Mason said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "She's confirmed that Blackwood Industries has been surveilling me since my deployment to Kajari Province, where my team recovered weapons with serial numbers traced back to your shell companies." For the first time, Alexander's composure truly cracked. His eyes darted to the boardroom door, where FBI agents now stood visibly. "This is absurd," he blustered. "A desperate attempt by my sister to maintain control of a company she's systematically undermined. Whatever this man believes happened to his wife, it has nothing to do with Blackwood Industries." "The financial records say otherwise," Claire pressed. "Sentinel Strategic Solutions received 2 payments totaling $500,000 around the time of Rebecca's accident. Sentinel, which financial analysis confirms is controlled by Catherine through offshore accounts." All eyes turned to Catherine, whose professional mask had begun to slip, revealing the calculation beneath. "Business transactions between private entities aren't evidence of anything criminal," Catherine said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Perhaps not on their own," agreed Diane Chen, stepping forward and displaying her FBI credentials. But combined with Ms. Harrison's testimony and the recording devices Mr. Blackwood's security team planted in the Hayes residence, they establish a clear pattern of surveillance and intimidation. The boardroom erupted in confused questions, board members looking between Alexander and Claire with growing concern. Gregory Peterson rose to his feet, his expression thunderous. Alexander, what the hell is going on here? Are federal agents in our boardroom because of your actions? Alexander's face had gone pale, but his eyes burned with the cornered rage of someone accustomed to power suddenly facing its loss. This is a witch hunt, he spat. A conspiracy between my sister and the federal government to seize control of private enterprise. No, Alexander, Claire said quietly. This is accountability, something our father taught you to believe you were above. Something in Alexander snapped. He lunged across the table toward Claire, all pretense of civility abandoned. You self-righteous bitch. You think you can destroy everything our family built? Everything we're entitled to? Mason moved instantly, placing himself between Claire and her brother. But Alexander wasn't targeting her physically. His rage was verbal, a public meltdown that confirmed every suspicion. I built the relationships that kept this company profitable, Alexander shouted, oblivious to the recording devices capturing every word. While you played an environmental crusader, I maintained the connections that matter. The military contracts, the resource rights, the political influence. Including eliminating obstacles like Rebecca Hayes, Claire asked, her voice steady despite the tension. What was one nosy journalist compared to a multi-billion-dollar acquisition? Alexander snarled, too far gone to recognize the trap. Terrigen was crucial to our rare earth mineral strategy. We couldn't let some bleeding heart reporter derail it with indigenous rights complaints. The confession hung in the air, stark and undeniable. In the sudden silence, Diane Chen stepped forward. Alexander Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, illegal weapon sales, and multiple violations of federal statutes. She nodded to her agents, who moved forward to take Alexander into custody. Alexander's rage transformed into disbelief as agents secured his hands behind his back. This is ridiculous. I'm Alexander Blackwood. Do you have any idea who my contacts are in Washington? Catherine Reynolds, ever the pragmatist, was already negotiating with another agent, her voice low and urgent as she presumably began outlining a cooperation agreement. As Alexander was led from the room, still protesting, he locked eyes with Claire one final time. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you've won, but you've destroyed everything our grandfather and father built. For what? Some moral high ground that doesn't exist in the real world? Claire met his gaze steadily. No, Alexander, I've saved what they built from what you would have turned it into. The difference matters. The board members remained seated in stunned silence as Alexander disappeared into the corridor, flanked by FBI agents. Gregory Peterson was the first to recover, turning to Claire with a mixture of shock and respect. I think, he said slowly, the board will need a full briefing on exactly what has been happening in this company. Claire nodded, her composure intact despite the emotional confrontation. You'll receive complete transparency. The legitimate operations of Blackwood Industries must continue while we address the criminal activities Alexander orchestrated. As Claire began outlining immediate steps to stabilize the company, Mason stepped back, his role in this part of the drama complete. The corporate aftermath would be Claire's domain, a world of shareholder confidence, regulatory compliance, and strategic realignment. Dave appeared at his side, a slight smile on his face. Mission accomplished, brother. Almost, Mason replied. Alexander's in custody, but there will be legal battles ahead. High-powered lawyers, political connections, the works. The evidence is solid, Dave assured him. Diane's been building this case for years. With Claire's documentation and Eleanor's testimony, it's airtight. Mason nodded, allowing himself to believe for the first time that justice for Rebecca might actually be possible. Emma will need to know about her mother, about what really happened. When she's ready, Dave agreed. But today let's focus on the win. Alexander Blackwood is going down, and the weapons pipeline he maintained is being dismantled as we speak. The board meeting continued for another hour. Claire calmly addressing questions and outlining the transition plan she had prepared. Mason watched with admiration as she navigated the complex corporate politics with the same determination she had shown throughout their ordeal. When the meeting finally concluded, the board members filed out, many stopping to speak privately with Claire. The room gradually emptied until only Claire, Mason, and a few FBI agents remained. "You did it," Mason said quietly when Claire approached him. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have reached this moment without you, Mason." Before he could respond, Diane Chen joined them. Preliminary interrogation of Catherine Reynolds is already yielding results. She's providing details on the entire operation, including confirmation of the plot against Rebecca. She's seeking a cooperation agreement in exchange for testimony. The news settled over Mason like a physical weight lifting. "So there will be justice, real justice." "There will," Diane confirmed. "It won't bring Rebecca back, but those responsible will face consequences." A call from Dave interrupted them. He had picked up Emma from the secondary safe house and was bringing her to meet them. The mention of his daughter shifted Mason's focus immediately from the past to the future. "What happens now?" he asked Claire. "And now I rebuild this company the right way," she replied, "with transparency, accountability, and purpose beyond profit." She hesitated. "But first, I think I need some time. Perspective. Space to decide what kind of leader I want to be going forward." Mason understood completely. Major life transitions required adjustment, recalibration of priorities and values. They had both experienced seismic shifts in recent days. When Emma arrived, bursting into the room with the boundless energy of childhood, Mason felt the final piece of his world slide back into place. She hugged him fiercely, then turned to Claire with equal enthusiasm. "Did you beat the bad guys?" she asked, looking between them. "We did," Claire confirmed, kneeling to Emma's level despite her formal attire. "Your dad was very brave." "He always is," Emma said with absolute certainty. "That's why he was a special soldier, and why he's the best dad." Mason felt his throat tighten at his daughter's simple faith in him. "Ready to go home, Pumpkin?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, then looked at Claire. "Is Miss Claire coming with us?" The innocent question highlighted the uncertainty of their situation. The immediate danger had passed, but the question of what came next, for all of them, remained unanswered. "Miss Claire has some important work to finish here," Mason explained carefully. "But maybe she can visit us soon." Claire smiled, though Mason could see the emotional complexity behind it. "I'd like that very much, if it's okay with both of you." The next few days passed in a blur of official statements, evidence processing, and media speculation. Alexander and Catherine remained in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk. The Blackwood Industries Board appointed an interim management committee, while Claire took a short leave of absence to recover from her ordeal, a convenient explanation that gave her the space she needed. Mason and Emma returned to their home in Ridgewood, now cleared of surveillance devices by FBI technicians. The familiar spaces felt different somehow, as if the house itself had been transformed by the revelations about Eleanor Harrison's years of watching them. "We could move," Dave suggested during a visit. "Start fresh somewhere new." Mason considered the idea as they sat on the porch, watching Emma play in the yard. "Maybe, but this is home to Emma. All her memories of Rebecca are here. And now memories of Claire, too," Dave observed carefully. Mason didn't deny it. "She's taken a temporary apartment in the city while things settle at Blackwood. We've talked a few times." "Just talked?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "It's complicated," Mason admitted. "We went through something intense together. That creates bonds that aren't always clear at first." Dave nodded, understanding the psychology of shared trauma and survival. "Just don't wait too long to figure it out. Life's too short for hesitation. We both learned that the hard way." A week after the confrontation at Blackwood Industries, Claire called with news. She had testified before a grand jury, which had returned indictments against Alexander, Catherine, and several co-conspirators. The case was proceeding exactly as Diane had predicted. "I've also made a decision about my future," Claire told Mason. "I'm stepping down as CEO." The announcement surprised him. "After everything you fought for?" "I'm not abandoning ship," Claire clarified. "I'll remain on the board, guiding the ethical transformation. But the company needs new leadership, untainted by the Blackwood name and history. And what will you do? Mason asked. I'm establishing a foundation focused on corporate accountability and environmental justice, she explained, using my shares and influence to create change from outside the system rather than within it. Well, the decision made perfect sense to Mason. A way for Claire to honor her principles while escaping the golden handcuffs that had constrained her for so long. I'm coming back to Ridgewood tomorrow, she added. If you and Emma are free, I'd like to see you both. The next day they met at a small park near Mason's home, neutral territory for a conversation that felt momentous despite its casual setting. Emma raced to the playground, giving the adults space to talk as they walked along the park's perimeter. How's Emma doing with everything? Claire asked, genuinely concerned. Better than I expected, Mason admitted. We've talked about Rebecca's death, about what really happened. Not all the details, but enough. Kids are remarkably adaptable when they're given truth they can understand. Claire nodded, watching Emma navigate the monkey bars with determination. She's extraordinary, a testament to your parenting. And Rebecca's influence, Mason added. And even gone, she shaped who Emma is becoming. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Claire spoke again. I've been thinking about what happens next. For me, for you and Emma, for us, if there is an us. The directness was pure Claire, the corporate leader accustomed to addressing challenges head-on. Mason appreciated it. There could be, he said carefully, if that's what we both want, but it would need to develop naturally, not from the intensity of what we went through. I agree completely, Claire said, relief evident in her voice. I'd like to get to know you and Emma in normal circumstances. No life-threatening situations, no corporate conspiracies, just regular life. Mason smiled at the concept. Regular life sounds pretty good right now. 6 months later, Mason stood on the dock at the cabin, watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant golds and crimsons. Behind him, laughter drifted from the cabin, Emma teaching Claire the fine art of marshmallow roasting over the fireplace. So much had changed in half a year. Alexander's trial was proceeding, with Catherine Reynolds' testimony proving devastating to his defense. The restructured Blackwood Industries had announced a major shift towards sustainable technologies, with the weapons divisions divested entirely. Mason had partnered with Dave in his security consulting firm, using his skills to protect rather than fight. The work allowed him flexible hours for Emma and the freedom to choose assignments aligned with his values. And Claire had transformed as well. Away from the corporate pressure cooker, she had discovered a lightness Mason suspected had been buried since childhood. Her foundation was making real impact, and she had developed a genuine bond with Emma, never trying to replace Rebecca, but creating her own unique relationship with the girl. Their relationship had evolved gradually, just as they'd planned. Dinners, outings with Emma, quiet evenings of conversation. The attraction that had sparked during their flight from Alexander had deepened into something more substantial. Mutual respect, shared values, genuine affection. Claire joined him on the dock, wrapping a sweater around herself against the evening chill. Emma's determined to make the perfect golden marshmallow. She says it's a science and an art. Mason smiled. She gets that precision from her mother. Rebecca was the same way about baking, everything measured exactly. The ease with which he could now mention Rebecca was itself a kind of healing. Claire had never shown jealousy or insecurity about Rebecca's continued presence in their lives. Instead, she honored it, understanding that love wasn't diminished by acknowledging what came before. The foundation approved the scholarship program today, Claire said after a moment. 10 full rides for students pursuing environmental journalism. The Rebecca Hayes Memorial Scholarships. The news touched Mason deeply. The program had been Claire's idea, a way to honor Rebecca's work while creating something positive from tragedy. She would have loved that, using power and privilege to amplify voices that need to be heard. They stood together watching the last light fade from the sky, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. Emma's voice eventually called them back to the cabin, where she proudly displayed marshmallows toasted to perfect golden brown. The three of them settled on the porch as true darkness fell, Emma pointing out constellations she'd learned from the star chart Dave had given her. When she finally fell asleep against Mason's side, he carried her to bed, tucking her in with the practiced movements of a father who treasured each such moment. Returning to the porch, he found Claire gazing at the star-filled sky, her expression thoughtful. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, resuming his seat beside her. "I was thinking about broken pieces," she said. "How sometimes they find each other and create something new, something that wouldn't have existed if the breaking hadn't happened first." Mason understood exactly what she meant. His life had shattered when Rebecca died, as Claire's had fractured under the weight of her family legacy. Yet somehow those broken pieces had aligned, creating possibility where there had been only loss. "There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi," he told her. "When pottery breaks, they repair it with gold, highlighting the cracks instead of hiding them. The piece becomes more beautiful because it was broken, not despite it." Claire smiled, reaching for his hand. "I like that, honoring the breaks as part of the whole." And they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, two people who had faced destruction and emerged stronger. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in years, both Mason and Claire faced it with hope rather than resignation. Sometimes the most beautiful things were created from broken pieces, finding each other in the darkness.